No contact breaks avoidance in a way you never expected. Let me ask you something. How many times have you been stuck in a cycle where someone pulls away and you chase? Or maybe you're the one who pulls away, convinced that distance is the only way to feel safe. But what if I told you that no contact isn't just about ignoring someone, it's about breaking the very foundation of avoidance itself? See, an avoidant lives in a world where distance equals control. They've trained themselves to believe that closeness is dangerous, that needing someone makes them weak. So when they feel intimacy creeping in, they withdraw. It's not personal, it's their survival mechanism. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think chasing will fix it. They think proving their worth will change an avoidant's mind. But let me be real with you. When you do that, you reinforce their belief that love is overwhelming, suffocating. You become the thing they're running from. But when you go no contact, everything flips. You remove the validation they expected from you. You remove the comfort they took for granted. And for the first time, they're forced to face the silence, the very thing they thought they wanted. And that silence, that's what breaks them. Because avoidants don't just fear intimacy. They fear abandonment too. They want connection, but don't trust it. No contact forces them to confront that internal war without you feeding the cycle. This is not about playing games. This is about breaking free from dysfunctional patterns. This is about understanding that your piece is just as important as theirs. So stop proving yourself, stop explaining yourself. The most powerful move you can make is to step back, focus on your growth, and let them realize, for the first time, that distance doesn't just protect them, it also isolates them. And when that realization hits, that's when real transformation begins. Avoidants live in a paradox they don't always recognize. On the surface, they appear independent, self-sufficient, and even emotionally detached. They build walls, creating distance between themselves and others, believing that keeping people at arm's length will protect them from pain. But beneath that tough exterior, something else is happening, something they often won't admit, even to themselves. At the core of avoidance is a deep fear of intimacy. They associate closeness with discomfort, expectations, and emotional overwhelm. Many avoidants develop this mindset early in life, often due to inconsistent or intrusive caregiving. If their emotional needs weren't met consistently as children, they learn that vulnerability leads to disappointment, so they shut down. They convinced themselves that relying on others was unsafe, that emotional distance was the key to survival. Over time, this pattern became so ingrained that even in adulthood, they instinctively withdraw when a relationship begins to feel too close. But here's the part that most people don't realize. While avoidants push away intimacy, they also fear abandonment. They don't want to be left, but they also don't want to be suffocated. This internal contradiction creates an endless cycle of emotional push and pull. One moment they crave connection, the next they feel trapped and overwhelmed. When someone gets too close, their instinct is to run. But when that person actually leaves, they feel the sting of loss, sometimes in ways they never expected. Avoidants typically operate under the assumption that people will always be there, waiting in the background. They assume that if they withdraw, the other person will reach out, chase, or try to fix things. This belief allows them to feel in control. As long as they know you'll be there, no matter how much they pull away, they feel secure in their detachment. The moment they sense they're losing that control, though, everything shifts. This is why no contact is so powerful when dealing with an avoidant. When you pull away instead of chasing, you disrupt the dynamic they're used to. You remove the safety net they've relied on, the idea that they can always keep you at a comfortable distance without truly losing you. When you go silent, they are forced to sit with a reality they never anticipated, that their avoidance doesn't just keep them safe, it isolates them. At first, an avoidant may not react. They may even convince themselves that they prefer the silence. They tell themselves that this is what they wanted, that they finally have the space they crave. But as time passes, something deeper starts to emerge. The absence they thought would bring them peace instead brings them discomfort. They start to wonder why you haven't reached out, why you haven't tried to break the silence. And in that moment, they are confronted with something they've spent a lifetime avoiding: uncertainty. Avoidants function best when they feel in control, but no contact strips them of that control. They can't predict what will happen next. They don't know if you'll return, if you've moved on, or if they finally push too far. That unknown is unsettling because, for all their resistance to closeness, they still want to feel wanted. They still want to feel important. When that reassurance is suddenly gone, they have to face emotions they've been running from: loneliness, regret, even fear. This doesn't mean every avoidant will immediately change or come running back. Some will double down on their detachment, convincing themselves that they don't care. But even if they don't express it, they feel the impact. They struggle with the realization that space doesn't necessarily bring relief. Instead of feeling free, they feel disconnected. Instead of feeling safe, they feel uncertain. At its core, no contact forces avoidance to confront their deepest fear, that in their attempt to protect themselves, they may have pushed away the very connection they secretly long for. When you chase an avoidant, you unknowingly reinforce the very fears that drive their behavior. Avoidants are wired to see intimacy as overwhelming, even threatening. It's not that they don't want connection, it's that they don't trust it. Their instinct is to protect themselves by creating distance. And when you chase, beg, or try to reason with them, it confirms their belief that relationships come with pressure, expectations, and emotional demands they can't handle. To understand why this happens, you have to look at the core fear avoidants carry. Many avoidants have learned from an early age that love comes with conditions or consequences. Maybe they had caregivers who were emotionally unpredictable, sometimes warm and present, other times cold and dismissive. Maybe they were rewarded for being independent, but criticized for expressing emotional needs. Over time, they internalized the idea that depending on others is risky. As a result, they learned to detach as a form of self-protection. Fast forward to adulthood, and these same patterns play out in relationships. When someone gets too close, avoidants experience an internal alarm. Their nervous system registers closeness as a potential threat, and they react by shutting down or pulling away. It's not always intentional, it's a learned response. But when they withdraw, they expect the other person to react in a way that confirms their fear. If you chase, you prove them right. From their perspective, your pursuit feels like proof that intimacy is overwhelming. They see your texts, your calls, your attempts to talk things through, and instead of feeling reassured, they feel pressured. They don't process it as love or care. They see it as another reason to retreat. And the more you chase, the more they distance themselves. It's a cycle that repeats itself over and over. What makes this so frustrating for the person on the receiving end is that your actions come from a place of love. You want to connect, to understand, to bridge the gap between you. But avoidants don't interpret it that way. They interpret pursuit as a loss of control. It makes them feel like they are being trapped and their instinct is to escape. This is why trying to fix an avoidant's fears by offering more love doesn't work. Logic won't change their emotional programming. No amount of explaining, reassuring, or proving your worth will make them suddenly feel safe in a way they haven't before. If anything, it makes them double down on their avoidance. They convince themselves that they were right all along, that relationships demand too much, that closeness is suffocating, that they are better off alone. Ironically, the only way to break this cycle is to do the opposite of what feels natural. Instead of chasing, you have to step back. Instead of proving your value, you have to embody it. When you stop giving them the reaction they expect, you shift the dynamic. They are no longer in control of the push-pull cycle they're used to, and without you feeding their fear, they are forced to sit with their own emotions. At first, they may feel relieved. Avoidance often craves space, so when you pull back, they may see it as confirmation that their withdrawal was the right decision. But over time, that relief turns into something else, uncertainty. They start to wonder why you aren't reaching out, why you aren't fighting to keep them. And for the first time, they are left alone with the reality of what distance truly feels like. This is where real change happens, not through words, not through effort, but through absence. Avoidants have to feel the consequences of their withdrawal to truly process what it means. They have to experience what it's like when someone no longer chases, when they are left with the silence they thought they wanted. That's when they start questioning their own patterns. That's when they begin to realize that maybe, just maybe, their fear of intimacy has cost them something real. Avoidants rely on a certain dynamic in relationships. They expect that no matter how much they withdraw, the other person will always be there, reaching out, checking in, or trying to close the emotional gap. This expectation provides them with a sense of control. It allows them to maintain their distance while still feeling secure in the knowledge that someone cares. But when you go no contact, you disrupt that pattern entirely. You remove the validation they have come to expect, and in doing so, you force them to confront an emotional reality they have spent years avoiding. At first, an avoidant may not consciously recognize the impact. They may feel relief, telling themselves that they finally have the space they wanted. Many avoidants genuinely believe that independence is the key to their emotional stability. So when a relationship dynamic changes, they rationalize that distance is good. They might even convince themselves that they don't care, that the silence is exactly what they needed. But here's where things take an unexpected turn. Over time, something shifts. What once felt like freedom starts to feel like emptiness. The person they assumed would always be there is suddenly gone, and that absence begins to weigh on them in ways they never anticipated. Avoidants are used to a cycle. They pull away, the other person chases, and the push-pull dynamic continues. But when you go silent, you interrupt that cycle. They aren't getting the reassurance they expected. There's no message waiting for them, no sign that you are still emotionally invested in keeping the connection alive. And that's when the discomfort begins. For the first time, they have to sit with their own emotions without external validation. Avoidants typically suppress their feelings, distracting themselves with work, hobbies, or other forms of self-isolation. But when they realize that the person they pushed away is no longer chasing, a different kind of anxiety kicks in. They start to wonder, have they finally pushed too far? Is this silence temporary, or have they lost something meaningful? The interesting part is that avoidants don't always show their emotional struggles outwardly. Unlike people with anxious attachment styles who tend to express their distress openly, avoidants internalize it. They may act indifferent, but internally they are processing the unexpected loss of attention and care. This often manifests in small but telling ways. They might find themselves checking their phone more often, scrolling through old messages, or thinking about moments shared with you. They may even feel a strange sense of restlessness, unsure why something feels off when they were so certain that space was what they needed. Avoidants don't like to admit that they need reassurance. It goes against the identity they've built around self-sufficiency. But human nature doesn't work that way. No matter how much someone tries to convince themselves that they don't need connection, deep down, everyone wants to feel valued. No contact strips away their ability to receive that validation passively. They don't get to rely on the idea that you'll always be there, waiting for them to come around. Instead, they're left wondering if they've lost that security entirely. This isn't about punishing an avoidant. It's about breaking a cycle that keeps both people stuck. When you remove their expected validation, you give them a chance to experience what life is like without it. And that experience is often far more powerful than any conversation or argument could ever be. Some avoidants will try to distract themselves, pushing away their discomfort through work, friends, or new connections. But distractions can only last so long. Eventually, they will have to face the truth that the person who once made them feel seen, wanted, and cared for is no longer playing their role in the cycle. And when that realization hits, it forces them to question their own patterns. This is how real change begins. Not through words, not through explanations, but through the undeniable reality of absence. The absence of validation, the absence of attention, the absence of the safety net they never realized they depended on. Silence is one of the most powerful forces in human relationships, yet most people underestimate it. When dealing with an avoidant, silence speaks louder than any argument, explanation, or emotional outpouring ever could. Avoidants are used to a particular dynamic. When they withdraw, they expect the other person to react. They expect texts, calls, and attempts to bridge the gap. They expect reassurance, validation, or even conflict. But when you respond with silence instead, everything shifts. At first, an avoidant may feel relief. They have spent their entire lives believing that space is their safety net, that distance is the answer to their discomfort. When you don't reach out, they may interpret it as confirmation that they made the right choice. They tell themselves that the quiet is peaceful, that they finally have the independence they always wanted. But as time passes, something changes. Silence does something no amount of chasing ever could. It forces them to sit with themselves. Without your messages, your presence, or your energy in their life, they are left alone with their thoughts. And this is where the unexpected happens. Avoidants don't just avoid other people, they also avoid their own emotions. They have built their identity around self-sufficiency, around the belief that they don't need deep emotional connection to be happy. But when the noise of daily distractions fades and they are left in silence, the emotions they have buried for so long begin to surface. They start to wonder why you haven't reached out. They replay old conversations in their mind, analyzing things they never paid attention to before. They think about the way you used to respond when they pulled away and how different it feels now that you haven't. The lack of contact creates an unfamiliar void, one they can't immediately explain. This isn't something they'll admit right away, even to themselves. Avoidants pride themselves on their independence, and acknowledging that the silence bothers them would mean confronting a truth they've spent years running from, the fact that they do, in fact, crave connection, that despite their fears, they don't actually want to be left alone. This internal struggle is something they are not prepared for. They expected you to chase, to prove that you still cared. They expected the cycle to continue as it always has. But instead, they are met with nothing. No validation, no reassurance, no proof that they are still in control. And that lack of control is what shakes them the most. Silence is a mirror. It forces an avoidant to face themselves, to sit in the discomfort they usually escape through withdrawal. Without you filling the space, they have to process what distance actually feels like, rather than what they imagined it would. They have to reckon with the reality that their coping mechanisms, pushing people away, shutting down, seeking solitude, don't always bring them the peace they expected. And here's the crucial part. This realization doesn't happen overnight. At first, they may distract distract themselves, convincing themselves that they're fine. They might throw themselves into work, hobbies, or even other relationships, anything to avoid feeling what the silence is making them confront. But over time, the weight of absence becomes harder to ignore. What makes silence so powerful is that it gives them no escape. Words can be argued with, texts can be dismissed, but silence is undeniable. It lingers in the background, growing heavier the longer it stretches. It doesn't beg for attention, but it demands it in a way that nothing else can. Eventually, even the most avoided person will feel the shift. Whether they act on it or not is up to them, but one thing is certain, they will feel it. Because silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of something deeper. It's a reminder of what's missing, of what they took for granted, and of what they might have lost. Avoidants pride themselves on their independence. They convince themselves that they don't need anyone, that emotional closeness is more of a burden than a necessity. This belief is deeply ingrained, often formed in childhood when they learned that vulnerability led to disappointment or pain. As adults, they continue to operate under the assumption that they are better off alone. But when you go no contact, you trigger something they aren't prepared for, a deep and unfamiliar sense of loss. At first, they may not recognize it. Avoidants are skilled at rationalizing their emotions away. When the distance begins, they may even feel relief. They tell themselves that space is what they wanted, that being alone allows them to focus on themselves without the complications of emotional connection. They may throw themselves into work, hobbies, or even other casual interactions to reinforce the belief that they're fine. But no contact is different from a temporary break. It is a void, an absence that doesn't immediately fill itself. And as time stretches on, that absence begins to take shape. Avoidants expect people to be there no matter how much they push them away. They are used to being pursued, to having the comfort of knowing that someone will always try to close the distance they create. But when you break that cycle, when you stop reaching out, stop checking in, stop waiting for them, you force them into an unfamiliar reality. For the first time, they have to consider the possibility that this time they aren't just taking space, they are actually alone. That realization doesn't hit all at once. At first, they may dismiss it, telling themselves that they simply need more time. But eventually, the silence becomes undeniable. They start to notice the little things, the absence of your messages, the lack of your presence in their daily life. They find themselves unconsciously checking their phone, expecting a notification that never comes. They scroll through old conversations, not necessarily because they plan to respond, but because they need to confirm that the connection was real. Avoidants struggle with acknowledging their emotions, so this process is often internal. Unlike someone with an anxious attachment style, who might openly express distress over losing a relationship, an avoidant keeps it locked inside. They might not even recognize their feelings as loss right away. Instead, it might manifest as irritability, restlessness, or an inability to focus. They might notice that things feel off, but not immediately connected to the fact that you are no longer in their life. But as time passes, they start to experience something they rarely allow themselves to feel: uncertainty. They thought that distance would bring them peace, but instead it has left them with questions. Have they pushed too far this time? Is this truly what they wanted? And most importantly, was the connection they walked away from more important than they allowed themselves to believe? This is a defining moment. Avoidants avoid emotional pain by shutting down and creating distance, but no contact forces them to sit with it. They don't have the usual comfort of knowing you'll reach out and make things easier for them. They are left to process their emotions on their own, and that is something they are not used to. For some avoidants, this experience leads to deep self-reflection. They begin to realize that their coping mechanisms don't actually protect them from loss. They just delay it. They may start to understand that by keeping people at a distance, they aren't actually avoiding pain, they are ensuring it. Not every avoidant will act on these realizations immediately. Some will fight them, pushing the feelings down, distracting themselves, or convincing themselves that they made the right choice. But the absence remains. And deep down, whether they admit it or not, they feel it. Because no contact doesn't just take away a person, it takes away the illusion of control they thought they had. Avoidants operate under the belief that they are always in control of their relationships. They maintain a sense of security by deciding when to engage and when to pull away, always assuming that the other person will remain available, waiting for them to return on their terms. This dynamic allows them to feel safe while keeping emotional intimacy at arm's length, but no contact disrupts that completely. It removes the security they have always relied on and forces them to confront a reality they never expected, one where they are no longer in control. At first, this loss of control doesn't register. Avoidants are conditioned to believe that distance is good for them, that pulling away is the right choice. They tell themselves that they feel lighter, freer, as if a weight has been lifted. But as time passes, something shifts. The silence they once welcomed begins to take on a different meaning. It's no longer just space. It's the absence of something familiar. something they assumed would always be there. Avoidants are used to relationships existing on their terms. When they withdraw, they expect their partner to reach out, to check in, to remind them that they are still wanted. This expectation isn't necessarily conscious, but it's deeply ingrained. When you go no contact, you remove that dynamic entirely. You are no longer responding to their actions, no longer giving them the validation they didn't even realize they depended on. And that creates a sense of confusion. They start to wonder why you haven't reached out. They check their phone more often, maybe even hovering over your name in their contacts, considering what to say, but resisting the urge to break the silence. They might rationalize it at first, telling themselves that they just need more time, but the more time that passes, the more the silence unsettles them. Avoidants don't typically experience a rush of overwhelming emotions all at once, unlike those with anxious attachment styles who feel loss immediately. Avoidants process emotions slowly and often unconsciously. At first, they may not even realize what's happening. They might feel restless, irritable, or unable to focus. They might throw themselves into work hobbies or even other relationships as a distraction. But no matter how much they try to push it aside, the absence lingers. For the first time, they have to confront the fact that they are not in control of this situation. They can't rely on you to fix things. They can't depend on your reassurance to ease their discomfort. And this realization is deeply unsettling. It forces them to question the narrative they have always told themselves, that they don't need anyone, that they are better off alone, that emotional closeness is something they can take or leave without consequence. This is where avoidants face a crossroads. Some will double down on their avoidance, convincing themselves that they are fine, that the relationship didn't mean as much as they thought. But even in those cases, the seed of doubt has been planted. They might not act on it right away, but the awareness of what they have lost will continue to grow. Others will begin to question their patterns, to wonder if pushing people away is really serving them. They may start to see that their need for control has actually kept them from experiencing real connection. No contact is powerful because it forces an avoidant to sit with their own emotions in a way they never have before. It removes the safety net they have always depended on and makes them face the reality of their choices. Some will fight it, some will ignore it, but none will be untouched by it. Because when the control they once had disappears, they are left with nothing but themselves. And for an avoidant, that is the most unfamiliar and uncomfortable place to be. Avoidants have spent their lives perfecting the art of emotional detachment. They have built walls, reinforced boundaries, and convinced themselves that needing others is a sign of weakness. This mindset allows them to navigate relationships on their terms, engaging when it feels safe and retreating when intimacy becomes too overwhelming. But when you go no contact, something happens that they aren't prepared for. The dynamic they have always relied on disappears, and with it, a truth they have avoided finally surfaces. They are not immune to loss. At first, they may not consciously recognize this. Avoidants are skilled at numbing themselves, distracting their minds, and rationalizing their emotions away. They will tell themselves that the silence doesn't bother them, that they always knew this might happen, that they are better off without the complications of a relationship. They might even feel a sense of relief, mistaking the initial emotional numbness for peace. But time has a way of unraveling illusions. As the days turn into weeks, something shifts beneath the surface. The absence they once welcomed begins to feel like an unfamiliar void. The silence, instead of being a source of comfort, starts to create discomfort. They may not acknowledge it outwardly, but internally, thoughts creep in. They find themselves replaying past conversations, remembering small details they previously overlooked. They notice the gap where your presence used to be, and despite their best efforts, they cannot ignore the growing awareness that something is missing. This realization is deeply unsettling for an avoidant. They have always believed that emotional detachment protected them from pain. They have spent years convincing themselves that they don't form deep attachments, that they can walk away from relationships unscathed. But the more they sit with the silence, the more they begin to question whether that belief was ever true. What makes no contact so powerful is that it removes the safety net of passive reassurance. In the past, they always knew that if they pulled away, you would eventually reach out. Even if things got difficult, even if they avoided confrontation, they had the comfort of knowing that you were still there, still emotionally invested, still holding space for them. But when you stop reaching out, when you remove yourself completely, you take away that unspoken security. And suddenly, for the first time, they are faced with a question they don't know how to answer. Did I just lose something important? Avoidants don't like uncertainty. They prefer to be in control of when and how they engage in relationships. But no contact forces them into a position they never expected, to be the one wondering, waiting, and feeling the weight of unanswered questions. They don't know if you'll ever reach out again. They don't know if the silence is temporary or permanent, and that lack of control begins to gnaw at them in a way they never anticipated. At this stage, an avoidant may respond in one of two ways. Some will try to suppress the discomfort, distracting themselves with work, socializing, or even new romantic interests. But distractions can only last so long. No matter how much they try to fill the void, the absence remains. Others will begin to reflect, perhaps for the first time, on the way they have approached relationships. They may not immediately act on these realizations, but a seed has been planted. The question lingers in the back of their mind: have I been wrong about what I need? Regardless of how they choose to process it, no contact forces an avoidant into emotional territory they have spent their lives avoiding. It disrupts the narrative they have told themselves about love, connection, and independence. And even if they never admit it out loud, they will feel it. Because at the end of the day, avoidance is not the absence of emotion. It is the fear of experiencing it. And when silence removes all their usual defenses, that fear becomes impossible to ignore. Silence is more powerful than words. It forces an avoidant to face what they've been running from their entire lives: their own emotions, their own fears, their own need for connection. No contact isn't about manipulation. It's not about punishing someone or playing games. It's about stepping back and allowing reality to unfold without interference. And when you do that, something incredible happens. An avoidant may not immediately acknowledge the impact of your absence, but deep down they feel it. The security they once took for granted is gone. The dynamic they always relied on has disappeared. And for the first time, they are left to sit with the weight of their own choices. This is where real change begins. Not through force, not through chasing, but through allowing someone to experience what it truly means to lose you. So if you're struggling, wondering if no contact even matters, remember this: your silence speaks louder than any words ever could. It creates space for self-reflection, forces an avoidant to confront their emotions, and removes the illusion of control they thought they had. Whether they choose to act on these realizations or not is up to them. But one thing is certain: they will feel it. Because when the noise fades, when the distractions disappear, what remains is the undeniable truth. Real connection is not something that can be ignored forever. Thank you for your time, your presence, and your commitment to growth. Whether you're on this journey for yourself or seeking to understand the dynamics of avoidance, know that your strength in choosing yourself is what truly matters. Stay patient, stay strong, and most importantly, stay true to yourself.